Welcome back to the Moon Ridge podcast. I'm Zack Wakefield, and at Moon Ridge, we talk a lot about heritage and what it means and where it comes from and why it matters. And we also believe a hat is only as good as where you wore it and who you were with. The experiences, the people, the stories, the things that are worth holding on to. Today's guest is a Fort Smith, Arkansas original, a paper route kid, a roots guitarist, a Sigma Nu, a Razorback to his core, and the man who taught me that Wakefields have never been scared to put in the hard work. He's my dad, Dick Wakefield. This one's about family, about growing up in a neighborhood where everybody knew everybody, and about the kind of stories that only get better with time. So, without further ado, I'd like to welcome my dad, Dick Wakefield. Welcome to the podcast. We're just going to get right into it.
I'm glad to be here. I wish I'd had time to sit down with my grandfather and my grandmother, Kiki on my mother's side, and just talk about some things with them because they had a lot of, obviously growing up, they both grew up at the turn of the century. Grandmother was born in 1898, and my grandfather on my dad's side was born in 1892. So they obviously had a lot of experiences that none of us have ever had, and I always loved listening to those stories. I wish I'd had the wherewithal when I was a youngster to write them all down, but I did commit some to memory.
Well, that is the perfect segue into some of the notes I had written down here that I wanted to start in the conversation with. So I'd like to start with the story about your grandfather, my great-grandfather, Charlie Wakefield. And Charlie Wakefield was an absolute fixture of the Charleston, Arkansas community. He lived to be 102 years old, and most of that time, I suspect, was spent in and around Charleston. But Dad, I kind of like to hear if you can think of one story that would sum up your granddad, Charlie.
No one that I knew. And I asked my mother, I specifically asked her this question. I said, did you ever see him get mad? She goes, I never one time heard him or my grandmother, who passed away many years before he did. She passed away when I was in high school, but, I did get to know her pretty well. They never either one ever heard either one of them raise their voices. And I thought, wow. And I'm thinking about my parents, that in all the years growing up, I heard them get into one argument. And that's how significant that was, because I remember it. It was about baseball. And maybe, but let's just go back to the topic at hand. And the story kind of sums up his, he was the most incredible person I've ever known. It's hard to describe because it was just like a storybook childhood. We went down every Sunday. We went to church every Sunday morning, every Sunday night, and every Wednesday night. But after church on Sunday at noon, we would eat a little lunch, and then we'd drive to Charleston. They lived in this little house on Greenwood. They had been farmers, but they lived in this little house for many years. And when I was little, I was born in 1952. Every Sunday from then until, I don't know, at least junior high, at least for the next 12 plus years, and off and on after that, we would go to Charleston. And when we go to Charleston, my grandfather would gather up all the grandkids that came, and I had some cousins that would come occasionally. We were always there. 100% of the time we were there, the four of us. But just after my older brother, Steve, he was born in 1950. My sister was born in 55, and my younger brother was born in 57. So every 4th of July, he would gather us all, and whoever was there, and he would put us in his car. We went was Fluke Creek, just where a creek crossed the paths, across the road, and we'd stop there and just get out and throw rocks in the water and just mess around for a couple of hours. And he just stood up there and watched us and talked to us. And when you grow up, and that's what you do every week, we assume everybody's doing something similar to that. But I know now that that's the case, that I was very fortunate. And my aunts and uncles would be there, and they were really nice, people too. So get back to a specific incident with my grandfather. He would always take us out on the 4th of July. And my brother and I, especially my brother Steve and I, we had when we were young, we had paper routes and stuff, and we would save up for the 4th of July, and we'd go out and buy firecrackers and bottle rockets and other little different sparklers, whatever. And then my granddad would take us all out, however many we had. And my brother and I would take them, and you get those big strips of firecrackers, and we'd take them all apart. A move we regretted later in the day because we made them one shot at a time. And we would make model airplanes and ships and stuff during the year. And I guess some of them that we didn't have any sentimental, any kind of value to, we would blow them up on the 4th of July. And so we'd always have a sack of models or things we wanted to blow up. And my granddad just let us out by a creek there, and we'd just shoot till we got tired of shooting. At the end, we'd save a few for special occasions, I guess, not too many. And so we were riding back, and I don't know who all was in the back seat. We'd shot we were going to on the 4th of July. Well, one time, and this may have been the same time, I actually fell in the creek, and the creek was right up to the road. It was not a long distance down. I mean, if you 6 inches off the road, you were in the water. And I fell in. That was probably when I was 7 or 8 years old. I just remember going straight down. And then I remember it was almost a flying sensation. Like then I was standing up on the side of the road. And what my granddad had done was granddad had got me by my ear and picked me up out of the water and just stood me on the side of the road. Never said a word. Just stood me on the side of the road. But on our way home that day, we had a few firecrackers left. And this kind of sums up his demeanor. You didn't want to disappoint him, so you respected everything he said and wanted, and automatically he didn't have to tell you. It was pretty amazing. But anyway, we were lighting firecrackers and throwing them out the window. It was a country road. One of us would light them and the other one would throw them. But anyway, we throw one. One of us throws one. It hits the top of the door and comes back into the car. So it got me, Steve and I, and my granddad in the front seat. And so we're swatting at this firecracker, which you don't know in those old days whether you had 10 seconds or a half a second. They were just, unpredictable. Anyway, whoever we got it, we hit it enough where it just barely got out the window and went off. I mean, it sounded like a bomb going off in the car. And my granddad kind of looked over at us and said, "Boys, I don't know if I'd do that anymore." and that just kind of summed up. And then he went back to driving. Never didn't say another word.
I have some fond memories of going to Charleston with my grandfather down to see his dad, who was affectionately known as Uncle Charlie in the Charleston community. I think there's definitely an Uncle Charlie Day. I remember going to his birthday party, which was at I think it was the Methodist Church or a community center.
Senior center or something. Actually, Dale Bumpers, who was the senator, he'd gone to school with my dad in Charleston. And Betty Bumpers, my dad talks about that he had a date with Betty Bumpers one time. But I remember Dale calling him on his 100th birthday, and talking to him. And I was just so fortunate that I got to share him with my kids because he was just an amazing person, and I still miss him. It's funny, when my mom passed away last year, and we did the same thing with my dad. We went through a lot of old pictures and whatever stuff, and it brought my granddad and then my grandmother Kiki, my mother's mom, back into my current memory patterns or whatever. Yeah, I just started thinking more and more about how lucky I was and the fun things we did, and they were very focused on their family.
That reminds me of a good story. I believe there's one that involved a rooster.
Well, yeah, that would be one. That story of my granddad. We would go every Sunday afternoon, and occasionally we would eat down there. I would say 1 out of 10 times we would actually eat lunch down there. My grandmother had a little little living room, and then behind it, a little dining room, and then a little bitty kitchen. And but she was a really good cook, but she was an old farm, cooker. She was the one that with the chickens for eating. In their house in Charleston, her houses probably built back in the 30s. They had a big garden, and then behind that, a field, and then a church. But the other thing they had back there was a chicken house. And they didn't have many chickens that were kind of, them raising chickens was kind of toward the end when we were little. My great grandmother, she could prepare chicken too. They didn't do that for sensationalism. All that being said, we had on Q Street, I grew up 2004 South Q, Park Hill, in Fort Smith. And we had neighbors on one side, the Montgomerys. She was a nurse, Fred and Hazel. The other side, we had the Davenports, and they were an elderly couple. So one day they come in, and they got a box, and it's got, so they bring in this box over, and it's got 2 chickens in it, little baby chicks. And they had their little feathers on, and one was yellow and one was blue. And that's what they used to do back in those days. That was a promotion at a gas station. You filled up your car, you got a free chicken. I don't know how they talked them into getting 2 chickens, but they got one for each of us. And we named them Louie and Bluey, just because one of them was blue. We had those chickens, and we would take them out in the yard and play with them. How much you can play with chickens, but we would take them out and play with them. But and at night we had them in the box in our room. And my parents, after they go to bed, we'd get them out of the box and put them in bed with us. And so for the chicken's childhood isn't real long, but for 2 or 3 months, I would guess, we had those chickens there, and we didn't have any pets. I mean, those were actually the first pets we ever had that I recall. That and then the guinea pig. That's another story. When they got a little older and a little big, anyway, my dad or mom say, we need to take those down to granddad and grandmother's and let them have them because they've got a chicken house. It's perfect back there for chickens to live in. I don't know, exactly how they presented that, but they had to know that the end would not be good. So we took them down there, and we went a couple of weeks, and we'd go and do our introductions when we go down there, and say, hey, we're going to go see Louie and Bluey, and then we go out and play with them. Anyway, we went down there, ate lunch one day. Believe it or not, we had fried chicken. And I think the week before, Louie had disappeared, and I can't remember how they explained that one away. But we were down to one, and we knew it. And so after we ate lunch, and my grandmother could fry some chicken. Man, that was good. And we said, we're going to go see Bluey. And my granddad said, no, I don't think so. You're not going to be able to go see Bluey today. And we said, what do you mean? Why can't we go see Bluey? He said, because you just ate him. And I would say that was an experience I didn't know many people to have had.
That is a absolute classic story. So I want to kind of move forward a little bit. I think that gives us a little bit of your early one kind of childhood memories. So kind of coming into high school. So I think maybe a major event, a little bit traumatizing, but you had a car wreck on the way to school. Can you kind of describe that car wreck?
Well, Steve was 2 years older. So, when I was 14, I got my learner's permit the first day. I wanted to be able to drive the first opportunity I had. Steve, he wasn't in any big hurry. He took his time, and I wanted him to because my parents would have to take me on dates if we didn't have somebody else to go with. I mean, I wasn't embarrassed, but I probably was a little embarrassed. So anyway, Steve was 2 years older. He went to Northside his first 2 years, and then we moved. And we were in Ramsey Junior High, Northside High School. There was kind of a buffer zone at the edge of the district that took Ramsey people over to Northside. And so we moved. And so I was going to start at Southside, which was good because I played football, and Northside was another league. Really, they were super good. But I played at Ramsey, and I went out my 10th grade year at Southside. It wasn't much of I didn't grow. I was about the same size in the 10th grade as I was in the 6th grade. So, I was kind of tall and big for my class back in grade school, but after that kind of disappeared. So Steve would take me to school that year, his senior year. He would take me to school drop me off, and then he would drive over and go to Northside, and which Northside was across town. What would you say, 5 miles? Not, it wasn't
Yeah,
terribly far,
no, but
but
it was across town.
it was across town. And so we were going, this was being in January 2nd, first day back after Christmas vacation, 1968. And we had this, my dad didn't have any idea about cars other than the fact that if you could put them in drive and they went forward, then he was okay with it, because he bought some of the worst cars you can imagine. They were cheap. We had a used Comet, 1964 Comet he bought, that didn't even have a radio. I mean, it had no options on it, zero. It had a heater, it had a transmission, and it was like a big piece of steel. It was like driving a real tank, and it was just a.
They don't make the Comet anymore.
They don't make the Comet anymore. No, it's kind of like Mercury's version of the Falcon. Anyway, we'd bought this Opel Kadett, which was a GM car, but it was a German GM car, and even back then, European cars are smaller because fuel was a lot more expensive over there. And so this Opel Kadett was a little compact, it didn't have an air conditioner or anything like fancy like that in it. In fact, it was right on the edge when they started putting seat belts in cars. And if it had seat belts, we didn't use them. Nobody used them at first. I remember my buddy Frank Staver got a Mustang, and he went to a lot of trouble to stuff those seat belts underneath the seats. But anyway, we were going to school January 2nd. It had, there'd been a snow and ice storm. It was real cold. It was in the 20s, but the roads basically were clear. But if you went from our house, it was basically a straight shot to South Side, probably about 2 miles. And, but there's just one zigzag in the road. And
this was on Independence.
On Independence, we were heading east.
East on Independence.
So we were in the first curve. Well, they were building a house on that corner, so they had construction. And what we didn't think about, water going across the road there, and it had formed a big patch of ice. So we're going into this, and it starts curving to the left, and we start curving way to the left. And we wound up kind of doing a 360, went into this yard. And when we hit that yard, I guess, I don't know if his foot was on the accelerator or it just from the traction that it got, but it just shot right into this big telephone pole guy wire. And we just, I was holding my hands on the dashboard, and we bam. And I thought, wow, I got out of that one okay. And then I looked over at Steve, and he had blood start coming down his front of his head and then around his nose. And I go, oh man, he's hurt. And he looks at me, and he kind of like was about kind of swirling his head, because I didn't realize that I had mashed the windshield with my face, mostly my right cheek. I led with my right cheek and hit that because the whole window in front of me was smashed out. And then I looked down. My girlfriend had given me a yellow little windbreaker with my initials on it, and that's what I was wearing that day. And of course, yellow and red, quite a contrast. So we crash in this yard, and we look at each other and like, what do you do next in these circumstances? Well, you look for an adult, and that's what we did. We went up to the front door. And it wound up being a dentist. His name is Dr. DeLay. And we didn't know him, but that was his house. And he looks at us like, of course, you can imagine that this was probably 7:30 in the morning. He's getting ready to go to work, and you got these 2 bloody boys on your front porch. Well, he tells Steve to come in and call my parents, and that he would meet us at the hospital. And he told me to stay outside. And he brought me a towel, and he said, hold this on your face, hold this on your right cheek. Because what I know, it cut all the way through my cheek. You could see my teeth. It cut my lip all the way through, my nose cut in half. It had cut up my head, my forehead, my chin. Just my whole face was just mangled up pretty good. And so he had a Volkswagen Bug. He had me get in the back and Steve in the front. And he took us to the hospital. That's where, in fact, the kid that I was in school with, his dad was the surgeon, Dr. Lockwood, and he wasn't a plastic surgeon. I don't even know if they had a plastic surgeon in Fort Smith at the time, but he was a general surgeon, and
Stitch, yeah.
he sewed me up. And I remember just a couple of things from that session, and one was that pouring blood out of my shoe, and the other thing was he put this little white, like washcloth sized cloth with a hole in the middle, and the hole would open up where he was sewing. And the last place he put it on was my upper lip, and it was cut all the way through from my nose down to my through my lip completely. And I'm pretty sure that either the anesthesia was either empty or just didn't take. But I was 15 and I didn't know. If I'd have been older, I'd have said, whoa, 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 whoa. But he sewed my lip up without any anesthesia. I would say in my top 5 painful experiences of my life. But anyway, that was Steve got a few stitches in his head, but for the most part, he was okay. He had hit with his elbow. I think he had a couple of stitches in his elbow because he had hit the gear shifter with his elbow, and he had knocked the rearview mirror through the window with his head. But it kept him off of the windshield, which is a big deal. I'd have been kept off the windshield.
No such thing as safety glass back then. That was a moment in your life, I think was probably pretty scary. But I want to talk a little bit about the Brutes.
The Brutes, yeah, one of my fondest memories.
Tell me a little bit about the Brutes and their origin, and then I'd like to hear about the reunion you guys played a few years back. So
in the 7th, 8th grade, got to know some new people because we had all been grown up at Ballman, and then you had people from Fairview and other schools in the south side of town, and my cousin Lee. Now my cousin Lee, that's another whole story. I could do a chapter on him, but he was my mother's first cousin. Jill, Jane, and Lee. Lee was my age, Jill was Steve's age, and then Jane was a couple of years older. And they were just my dear cousins from growing up that I've known all my life. And so Lee and I had gone to church together. His dad and my mother, and my dad then too, went to Park Hill Church of Christ. And Lee's dad, Walter Lee, he was a lay minister. He would substitute preaching at smaller churches around when they were in between preachers. So, but when they didn't have something like that, they would come to Park Hill. And Lee tells a story that I talked him into. He'd always go to church with his dad, but I finally talked him into coming into the Sunday school class, and that was some great memories. It's good to have somebody your age that you go to church with. Anyway, but this is the first time we've gone to school together. We met these other two guys, Tom Anderson and Easy Barber. And I don't know how we got on the subject of music, but this was back in the mid to late 60s. And so that's back when the Rolling Stones and the Beatles were big, and all of the English, British invasion. Music was just a big deal. We would listen to it we had the little transistor radios and pick up the local stations because we didn't. It was a while before we finally did get a record player. But my parents just weren't into music. We finally talked them into getting it, and they bought us a record player with a package of 45s. I think they're 45s are single records. They had a song on the front and back. Usually, they're the one they expect to be hit on the front and just throwaway on the back. Beatles changed that because both sides of theirs would be, top hits, but up to that point. But in some of their early ones, I mean.
Do you happen to remember any A-side, B-side on a beat? Do you remember?
The biggest one was I Want to Hold Your Hand on the A-side, and I saw her standing there on the B-side.
Yeah, bangers.
And I saw her standing there a little. So Tom and Easy and I, we talked, and there was another guy that was also part of they had the three of them actually. The other guy, I won't mention his name out of respect for him, but he just didn't quite fit, and that's another story about how he became our manager. So we had I could play guitar, Tom could play the guitar, and Easy was a drummer, learning the drums. And this was when we were probably toward the end of the eighth grade at Ramsey. So we got together. A couple of practices. The other guy was there, but we'll just call him RP. RP was there, but we were behind the scenes trying to figure out how do we get him out of here. He's a good guy. We don't want to hurt his feelings, but we're not going to, we're not good enough ourselves to carry. So we got to find somebody to sing. And I was going, well, my cousin can sing. My cousin, and they knew Lee. I said, Lee can sing, but what equipment does he have? None. He had none. In fact, it took us a long time to talk him into finally buying a microphone. And you would have thought he had bought the contents of Fort Knox or something. Yeah, I think he spent $35 or something for the microphone. But at least I talked to him today. He hasn't changed much, but he's been real successful and done really well. I'm real proud of how Lee's done. But anyway, so we get together and we have a practice, the four of us, Lee and Tom and Easy and I, and it was just so much fun. It was a blast. We did our whole ninth grade year, and we just had all kinds of adventures. But anyway, the one little short story about we were trying to figure out how to get Rick out of the band without hurting his feelings too much. But so Tom, his mom was always helping us. We've got a contract, handwritten contracts. I've still got my handwritten brute contract, our agreement of, about being in the band. I guess Tom and his mom, maybe they wrote out 4 of these contracts, but I've still got mine. But we decided we're going to make Rick manager. We had these little cards printed up because he'd had some cards printed up when he was still in the band. He had his phone number on there. Well, we took the same card in a little different color and made the phone number everything the same, except we put manager beside his name. And so the next time we decided we needed to do it as a group. So the next time we were all together, we said, hey, Rick, we've got some good news for you. You've been promoted to manager. He wasn't very happy about it. I think we'd played one gig down at Goddard Methodist Church, and he had played with us, and we had unplugged the guitar out of the back of the amp and just laid the plug in the amp. And we were over there, we'd look at him, and he'd be in his microphone playing, and he was trying to hear. So we knew when he was doing that to distract him with something else. Anyway, so we were the Brutes, and we played a lot of, 60s. I had a Gibson SG guitar, which Steve had bought down at Sigler Music Company. He paid $325, found receipt for it 2 years ago. He had, and he was taking guitar lessons from a dentist. He wasn't a dentist at the time. He was named Mike Liggett, who was a little older, but he was real talented musically. Mm-hmm. And so he had these songs handwritten out. So Steve would learn them, and then he would teach them to me. And then I would go over and teach them the Brutes. Of course,
there was a lot of people throughout the years in Fort Smith that heard Mike Liggett play guitar. I remember him coming to.
He was a nice guy.
I went to was in the same class with one of his sons. And he would. I just always remember he was always up to jam and play a little bit, and I think he was pretty good.
Yeah, oh yeah, he was talented, and he was pretty industrious. He gave guitar lessons and stuff like that, and so Steve would learn, and then I said I'd teach the Brutes, and then Tom actually wrote a couple of songs. One of them was named Cindy, and the other one was actually an anti-drug song. What Have I Done? And a third song, maybe the most famous, and it was called Bull.
Okay. So a couple of originals.
I can still play it. I think it's got 2 chords. But it was funny when we had our 25th reunion. Tom was, had written it, but we'd have practice out. Easy lived in, his dad was an engineer and built bridges and stuff, and he had one of those big building, not big buildings. It was a single level, but the front was an office. Well, Easy and Debbie, his wife, made that into where they lived, and they made the offices and the bedrooms and all their decorating. It was just incredible. They're incredible. Easy was super smart. He was one of the top graduates in our deal, but his interest in life was woodworking, building cabinets. He graduated with a math degree, and he was one of the top students in our high school. He grew his hair out, and he was kind of along. And he and Tom lived together in college about a block from where I lived my first 2 years. But anyway, that 25th reunion, they said, "Hey, let's see if we can get a Brutes reunion." Of course, after Lee and I left the Brutes at the end of the ninth grade year, which we knew the writing was on the wall for us. Easy played in bands until recently. Easy just a great person, great guy, and very well liked, and he's been real good at keeping up with me in the last couple of years. But Easy's one of my favorite people because we just had so many good memories together. So Easy calls and says, "Hey, we're thinking about getting this, the Brutes back together." Lee's in Little Rock, but Tom was there, and then we can get a couple of these other guys that were there later to come in and sit in with us. We did have Dodie King, who was actually a super talented person. That he and Easy were the anchors. But anyway, he had a great setup to practice out at his shop, and we went out there 6 or 7 times, maybe more, and practiced like 4 songs. I think The Wait was one of them. Wild Thing, I sang on that, and I'm terrible, but it was fun. And Gloria.
That's good.
How could you not play 60s without playing Gloria? And and then probably my least favorite Beatles song, no, whatever that one is.
Hey Jude.
Hey Jude. I got to really disliking that because of the nah-nahs would just go on forever, and but people had fun doing it, and I was along for the ride. Anyway, one of my great memories, Tom, we'd kept up all these years, and we'd go out to lunch occasionally, and it was always a hoot. Tom was the funniest guy probably I've ever known.
You have said that on multiple occasions.
He's so clever, but a lot of times he didn't realize how funny he was being. Sometimes he was taking himself seriously, and you were going, because like the one time he told me that he spoke to a waiter, and he thought the waiter sounded Hispanic or something, and so he said something to the waiter in Spanish, and I said, "Oh, Spanish?" And Tom told me, he said, "I know all foreign languages." And he was dead serious. Wow. He goes, "Yeah." He says, "I have a little trouble with French sometimes." Well, he had some storylines that he had kept up over the years, and was still, one of them was that he was drafted by the New York Yankees. He was going to a baseball camp, and the police or somebody pulled him over the bus that he was on and got him off because they wanted him to go to spring training with the Yankees. He always had a Yankee shirt he wore all the time. But anyway, he was just a great guy, funny guy. And so we never knew for sure whether he was going to show up or not. And I think he showed up pretty much every time, maybe missed once. But one time he was there, and I can't remember if it was me. It probably was, because I was probably, other than Tom, I was the only one that knew Cindy, the song. And I didn't remember the origin of it, whatever, but Tom started doing the words. And more or less kind of a more spoken than sung, but the song was about a girl in our class named Cindy Brady. She was real cute. And of course, all the guys had a crush on her. So he went into this soliloquy kind of thing and explaining his feelings for Cindy and just the genesis of the song and about her, and I was just there playing just the rhythm, and it went on for. I could still be doing it. It was so much fun, and nobody really, other than Easy, Tom and I were the only ones that really understood what was going on. I mean, Easy and I understood what was going on, but it was just like, wow, great memory. But anyway, we played down at the Riverfront Pavilion. We played our 4 songs, and
Brought the house down, I'd
oh
imagine.
yeah, I've got a video. We watched a little bit of it the other day, but it was a real thrill to do it. And Lee actually came up and sang some.
Yeah, those are some great stories about high school and a high school reunion. So kind of moving forward from high school, then you get into college, you head up to the University of Arkansas, you pledged Sigma Nu. I was also a Sigma Nu many years later, and then we have Noah. Who knows where he will wind up this year, but he'll be rushing a fraternity at the University of Arkansas.
Having done it, I mean, it wasn't really me. There were guys that were born to be frat guys. I wasn't one of them.
Yeah, I wouldn't either.
But I wanted to be part of something. And my friends were, and my cousin Lee, we were intended to pledge together after going through, and back then you went through closed rush, which you went to all the fraternities and they cut and you cut and blah, 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 blah. Well, ended up, we didn't have any of the same ones. So we had to go different routes, and it worked out fine. It kind of gave us a little more being on your own. But I had some other Fort Smith guys. There were no Fort Smith guys to speak of when I pledged, and there were like 5 of us: Bill Walker and Rick Beecham and Dennis Kirkpatrick and a couple other guys. I have one little story.
Yeah, how about a story from that time?
For some reason, and I was lobbied the best I could against it because I didn't know what to expect. I knew nothing about fraternity life, fraternities. I know that the first night I spent in the Sigma Nu house, they had in the Sigma Nu house you had dorms which had beds in them. You had 2 floors. You had about 80 guys. So about 20 guys on the top floor and 40 guys and 40 guys on the bottom floor. And all the pledges lived there. And then at the end of each section of rooms, upstairs and downstairs, was 2 big rooms that all they had in was beds. And that's where everybody slept. You didn't sleep in your room. You couldn't sleep. You're not supposed to sleep in your room. It wasn't, whatever, coded for that. But so you would go spend the night, but they had a sheet on the door, and you would write your wake up time on there. So everybody went to bed. When they went to bed, they wrote their wake up time on the door. And some unfortunate pledge, if it was your job the next morning, you had to wake everybody up at their wake up time. It was a terrible job to have, I'll say that. Because one, you had to get up. You had to stay up till everybody went to bed because you had to know when the first person up was. Because then you had to set an alarm and get up. And missing somebody on a wake up call was not good. But anyway, I got to be president of my pledge class. I don't know why. I'd been president of student council in high school, so maybe they were trying to figure out what sucker would, go for it. And I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know if I was real unsure of myself as a fraternity guy. So, and one of the events we had, and back then was back when they didn't, they hazed, but not at the level they hazed when you were there. They hazed at a whole nother level, but certainly a whole lot more than they do now. I mean, we did get mistreated, I would say, on occasion. But in retrospect, once you became a member, a lot of your camaraderie and all that stuff just kind of disappeared. You still had your friends, but it wasn't the same. It turned out that the pledge time was the best time. Anyway, we did these annual, one of our charity things, and the pledge class had to do all the work on it, but members were involved in the Sigma Nu Special Olympics. And it was down at the Boys Club. And so we had to run, events. They have a 50-yard dash and high jump, just different events. And
Different from relays or the same? I mean,
the relays were sororities.
Oh yeah, gotcha.
Yeah, and I did that too.
Yeah,
I mean,
that was around,
that was
still
a
around,
little.
I assume.
That was Sigma relays. Did you all have that?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I just remember one. Okay, the one little sideline on that was we had a girl. They had a girl. One of the things was that we had a cow milking contest, and we had to get a cow and bring it down to campus. And then one girl from each sorority had to milk that cow, and whoever got the most milk, won first place for their sorority. And so all these girls would be down there with little fingers, squirting out a little bit of milk, and barely measurable. Then this girl gets down there. She's a country girl. She's there stretching her fingers, doing these little finger things, whatever. And when it came time for her to start, she had a teat in between every two fingers.
She was from Brinkley.
10 times more than the combination of all the other ones together. She practically filled that thing up they had like a minute. That was my Sigma relays. But anyway, this is the handicap. And so somebody, through their powers of persuasion, they had a UHF or VHF, whichever one it was, TV station. I think it was KGTO or something like that, but it was a local broadcast station. They say, we've got you a 30-minute show to talk about after the Special Olympics. 30 minutes on air, live. And well, that's great. Yeah, I don't know who agreed to do it, but anyway, whoever agreed to do it also agreed that I would be the MC. And so, I had to put a tie on or whatever. I had no idea. One of the my guests, it was a sit down format like Today Show. It's me at a table, and then I had 2 or 3 guests there. I can't remember the other, but one of them was Chuck Dykes, who was Sigma Nu. He and Bill Montgomery were Sigma Nus. Well, somehow we talked him into coming on there. I didn't do any. I don't think I.
Chuck Dykes would circle back into my Sigma Nu experience when our class got in trouble or we were still pledging, and it had something to do with some spring pledges. Anyway, the advisory committee got called. They brought in some former members, and Chuck was late 40s at the time. And I just remember him chewing everybody out. He was the guy that they called to bring the chickens home to roost, so to speak. And that was about the only time I ever saw him.
He didn't come over to the house very often. I know Bill Montgomery one time, I walked in my room, and he was on there talking to a Canadian Football League coach about trying out for his Canadian team. That was my exposure to Bill Montgomery. And they were both nice. And Chuck Dykes was a super nice guy.
I can't imagine having to walk in. You're helping out this fraternity, and then you got to go corral these 18 and 19.
You got some goober freshmen up there, interviewing. Well, I didn't know how to prepare, and I don't know if I would have if I had known. But I remember after about 5 minutes, we were talking about 25 minutes to go, I was done. I had asked every question I knew to ask. They had answered it. They weren't particularly expansive in their answers, but it was the longest. All the guys at the frat house were watching it. And when we got back over there, none of them would look at me.
We had a similar thing, and except it was the University of Arkansas television show. It had some guys that wanted to be sportscasters, and they would take calls live on the air. And I mean, it was just a free for all. It was who could call in and try to embarrass them the quickest. Yeah. I mean, the whole house was watching, and there were some guys that were really funny about prank calling. Yeah. Let's stick on the topic of the Razorbacks and the University of Arkansas here. So, a lifelong Razorback fan myself because of you and my grandfather, Dr. Eldon Pence. I watched a lot of Razorback events with you and him, a lot of quality time. Some of my favorite times I can remember were going down to the Southwest Conference tournament. I believe it had been in the late 80s, early 90s with Todd Day, Lee Mayberry, Oliver Miller. Daryl
Yeah.
Hawkins, one we brought up. I think Lindsey Howell,
Lindsey Howell. That was the
uh,
name I was trying to think of the other day.
Cannon Whitby.
I don't know how many of those Southwest Conference tournaments I went to, but every one I went to, we won. I mean, at the end, we were. I
I never
mean,
saw us lose a game in
yeah,
Barnhill South. Yeah.
we go and we were playing some jacked up Houston teams. Now we didn't beat them every time, but we beat them. We beat them, and I remember that one particular year that maybe it was one of the last years we went. That they had the SWC tournament was that we beat Houston. They were loaded too.
Don't even have to be there. And I think maybe if I think over the years, great games you've described to me, I think that Orange Bowl may be the.
I was looking for something this morning, and I saw my DVD of the 19. I'll tell you, here's a funny story on that a little bit about that Orange Bowl, which was January 1st, 1979 or 78. I can't remember which. It was one of those 2 years. I think it was 78, and Lou Holtz was our coach, and Barry Switzer was the Oklahoma coach. And it ended up like Texas, Notre Dame, Arkansas, Oklahoma. We were all like one-loss teams in Notre Dame. Yeah. And the number one, number two teams had gotten beaten that day. So it was down to our game and Notre Dame, who they were playing, I think, to determine who was the national champion. And it ended up we both won, and they got voted in, but we deserved as much as they did. I think our one loss was to Texas, I think, but we had a great team, but we were big underdogs in that game, and we had suspended. Lou Holtz had suspended two of our starters, one starting running back and then a starting wide receiver, Bobby Duckworth, and Michael Forrest and another guy. And they had all been suspended, which made it even bigger odds. Oklahoma was already a major favorite. And so back then, Michelle was married to Bill Kerr. Bill Kerr of the Kerr family, Oklahoma City, huge OU fans.
And Michelle is my aunt, my mom's sister.
And Bill, they were just so cocky and confident Oklahoma was. In Arkansas, we're like we are now. We don't have a lot of confidence when it comes to football, but we hadn't played the game yet. And so Bill was watching it, and he had some people in Oklahoma City, and they were watching it over at his apartment. We killed them. I think 31-6 or something, but it was the first play. They had the ball, and I think we tackled. We had like 10 guys in on the tackle, and we just smushed them. But we had, and that was back. Houston Nutt was the backup quarterback, and he played, and I've got that DVD, which is I watched every few years, and it's more fun every time. But anyway, so Bill and they were all real cocky about it, whatever. So after the game, we did have to go by and see Bill and see how he was doing, make sure he was doing okay. The TV was on its side on the floor. And behind where the TV was a big hole in the wall. And there was no Bill to be found. And so I didn't say, because they'd been so cocky about it, they deserved a little comeuppance. But it was a great game. I've never enjoyed one any more than that.
That's perfect. And I think just a truly iconic moment in Razorback sports history.
At one time, I can't remember what their line was, but it was 25 points or something. They took it off the board. It had gotten so big. I could tell you stories about Bill Kerr. I love Bill. He was a great guy. I remember when we first meeting him telling me that he'd been to 11 different schools from first grade to his graduation. He had a brother that was a year older than he was, and they were great guys, but man, they obviously grown up very differently than I had or any of us had. I went to parties over in Oklahoma City like I had never seen. First time I ever seen somebody get about a third of their ear bitten off. I saw that at one party. Some of the parties they had at their parents' house when their parents were gone, and they just got out of control where the word got out, and they didn't know hardly any of the people there, and they were stealing stuff. And I would just stood back and watched all this. It's like, wow, this is a whole nother
Partying in
deal.
Nichols
The
Hills. I actually,
crazy things.
he's been out of our family for a very, very long time, and my Aunt Michelle is one of the most dearest people to my heart, and I love her longtime husband Scott. He's one of the funniest guys I've ever met
Yeah,
in
Scott's
my life.
hilarious. And they were a much better match. Bill was just not he was way not ready to be married. And he was only like 19 or something when they got married. He one time told me about, because he'd call me every couple of years at one time back in the day. But he told me about getting married one time in Las Vegas when they were drunk, and it was some kind of Oklahoma City mob kingpin's daughter. And him telling the story about sleeping in an apartment after he thought that there were guys coming to kill him, it's priceless. I wish I had that story, but I laughed and laughed and laughed. He was I like Bill a lot, and I hope he did okay.
Let's talk travel. So one of the things that you've been involved with a lot of us as we've grown from Rafter M to Moon Ridge, and from more or less selling hats out of a trailer to having a store to having a brand to deciding it's not just about a product we're selling, but it's more of a kind of just a general lifestyle, and we like to take our hats and go on the road and experience travel and experience life and share that. To me, it's not, a hat's something that can go on a shelf or go in a box, but where you wore it and that experience is priceless and something you'll always have with you. So how about a travel story?
Some of the funny stories have happened to us when we travel with other family and friends. And one we travel quite a bit with Steve and Jerry, my brother, and his wife. But Steve, he's pretty funny in himself, but sometimes he doesn't realize how funny he really is. But this one story it's just a priceless story in my history. Was one time Cancun, for people I guess familiar with it, there's an island called Isla Mujeres, which is just, would you say, 45-minute boat ride?
Yeah, maybe.
From
It's a favorite. Isla is a favorite of mine,
yeah,
and a place that.
And it's just a small island, probably mile and a half, 2 miles, maybe from end to end.
Yeah, it's maybe 4, maybe 5, but it is
something like that. But
it is a cool place, and
it's not densely populated. It's very, they've got a few resorts. There's resorts to kind of spread out, but you go over and dock, and there's a downtown, and the downtown just these old cobblestone, and they're not like these romantic little cobblestone streets. They're like industrial cobblestone, sand, and
little grit on it.
Yeah, it's a little grit on it, but which adds to some it's interesting. So we're going over there. We'd done it before. We'd been over there for years, and this time we didn't. It was in the early years we were going over there, but we decided let's go over to Isla tomorrow and rent some mopeds. And which mopeds were like for the day, $20 maybe for a moped. And so let's do that. Okay, so we go to the public port. That's where we'd always ride. I like riding over from there. It was just a little more interesting. It wasn't a high speed. It was just their regular shuttle. So we're on there. It's not very busy. It's on like a Tuesday morning or something. And we're talking about the mopeds. Well, there's a guy on there, Caesar, who was a plant, basically. He was on there to try to get people to come see their timeshare at the Avalon, which is a big timeshare resort on Isla Mujeres. So Caesar's going, hey, I can get you some free mopeds. And I'm sitting there, Jerry's the front person talking to him. She likes to bargain hunt. I'll say that. She likes to bargain hunt. She says, I can't believe she's talking to this guy about these $20 mopeds. He goes, my mom is a salesperson out there, and they'll give you free mopeds just for signing up and go into the presentation, but just when you get there, you tell them, "Hey, I've already got a timeshare. I don't I don't need another one." But we were told that we could get free mopeds, so we went to their sales little headquarters in the town and waited for a cab. That Caesar got us a cab out to the resort, which was a couple of miles out. So we go up there, and the first thing they do is they put us in his room, and they come in and say, "Hey, we need to see a credit card from each of you. And that way we can confirm, I guess, that you're eligible to buy something."
You have credit.
And there was a lady, she was from the U.S., I can't remember where, but it was a room, it was a big round room. Probably had, 20 tables. And every table had some, victims and salespeople. And so we were put there with this lady, and she was our salesperson. So Jerry was all planned, because I said, "Yeah, this is, you want to get the free mopeds, I'll be real appreciative, but this is your thing, you and Caesar." And anyway, so she says, "Now and this room is full of people. There has to be 60, 80 people in this room." And it was real buzz with all these people talking. And I'm looking around at these people going, I feel for me, but I really feel for them, because they look like they want to get the heck out of Dodge as fast as they can. But anyway, so we're there talking to them, and Jerry tells them, "Yeah, we've already got a timeshare, and we're not really interested, but Caesar told us if we just came out here and came into this deal, we could get free mopeds." And that girl goes, "Wait a minute. What did you just say? You came out here with the sole intention of getting free mopeds without even listening to our sales deal?" The lady stands up, raises up her hand, yells, "We've got a situation here. We've got a situation here." The whole room goes dead quiet. And everybody, all 80 pairs of eyes, are staring at us. And then the sales manager comes over. And Steve wants to argue with him. He's a lawyer from Texas. Well, being a lawyer in Texas doesn't do crap for you in Mexico. The guy just kept going, "You expected us to give you free mopeds just for coming out here? So you all need to remove yourselves from this property immediately and don't look back." And so we got up and left, and we were walking out. Of course, we're on this resort 2 miles from civilization, and we're having to walk, which is fine, because I could not stop laughing.
No free mopeds.
Stephen, no free mopeds. Steve and Jerry were all upset at first. Then I think the humor of the situation dawned on them, and they started laughing too. I don't know if I've ever gone that long where I couldn't stop laughing thinking about the expression on Steve's face, especially when she stood up and started yelling, "We got a situation here." It was just hilarious. So then we rented the mopeds, and we stopped by this place we'd stopped by before they had some good guacamole. So we rode our mopeds out to this place. When we were getting back on the mopeds afterwards, and we'd had a margarita, but it was like one. And Steve gets on it, and before he gets his legs on it, he hits the accelerator, and his moped starts going, and he's hanging on to it, and it's going right toward the front door of the resort. And the parking guys, they're all diving out of the way. And again, my jaws were sore that day from laughing. And these people were walking by, and I was laughing. And Steve, eventually the moped went down. He crashed it, and he put a pretty good dent in it. I've got a picture of it somewhere, the dent that he put in there. I know when we took it back, that guy where we rented it kept looking at that dent, and when I see him look at it, I tried to distract him in some other way. But it was a fun day.
Let's lead into one kind of big grand finale story. Right. You can, dealer's choice, you pick any point in time, any subject matter you want. Just give us a Dick Wakefield classic here.
Classic. A lot of my stories when I was growing up, we had a lot, especially on my mother's side, a lot of family get-togethers, and we had some of the most interesting people. We had a great uncle that had a farm down by Scranton, Arkansas, and we'd all meet down there. And so I got to know my cousins, my aunts and uncles, and I guess I've always had an interest in getting to know these people. I did on my dad's side, but we didn't have as much family time as we did on my mother's side. My mother, they both had great families, but my mother and her brothers and sisters, she had two brothers and two sisters. They were all just so much fun. We growing up, and my grandmother Kiki is the head of that. Now Kiki herself was hilarious, but she was the one that, when Steve actually lived with her when he was going to the University of Tulsa undergraduate school. And she was with him a couple times. He was he had some bad driving habits. And he would get pulled over by the police, and she'd wind up chewing a policeman out. And she was just, I don't know, it's one of those people I wish everybody had gotten to know a little bit. But my cousin Jan, who's my age, and we still reflect a lot back on her grandmother. But one story, I don't know, it's kind of a little bit on the gruesome side, I guess. And I don't know if it'd be the proper one to tell. But, my dad grew up on the farm. He was the youngest of four boys who all lived to be at least 95. It was pretty amazing. And he was the youngest. He was the least farm boy of the farm boys, but he was a farm boy. I mean, they picked cotton. I know my dad told me their first car that they ever owned was actually somebody had bought a regular car back then. We're talking about 1920s, and they cut the back seat out of it, made it into a pickup truck. That was their first car. And he goes, last time I saw that, it was chickens were living in it in the barn. But he would, he had some interesting things about growing up on the farm. One time, my granddad died. I later got this when he was young. He was the oldest. My grandfather was the oldest of six, and he was like 13 or 14 when his father died. And so he became the patriarch of the family when he was 14, and supported the family, from that point on. And he never really talked about it, but the other family members did. And he was just, if you had somebody you depended on, he would have been one to do it for sure. But anyway, so they grew up on his farm, and I guess one of the pets, they weren't big into pets. They had a couple of dogs, I guess, over the years, but they had some guinea pigs. And I don't know. I think if I had to go back and ask, I don't know if guinea pigs were pets or if they were like a lot of the other pets, like their chicken pets.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. Anyway, we were growing up. We never had a pet. We didn't have a pet for several years, and so we didn't know anything about dogs, and we didn't know anything about cats or whatever. But my dad figured we'd know enough about guinea pigs, so he gets us a guinea pig, and we're probably Steve and I were probably. It was around 1960 because we named it John Fitzgerald after the president. And it was our first official pet. And we loved that guinea pig, and we all petted it. Julie was little and Eddie were little, but they loved it too. We all loved it. Well, my parents, sometimes after church on Sunday night, they'd have friends over to play cards. And so our job was to play with whatever kids they had, no matter what age or whatever, And so the M's came over, and we let them hold we made the misfortune of letting the girl, who was probably 7, hold the guinea pig, John Fitzgerald, and she threw it down. And we didn't know what happened, but it couldn't use its back legs anymore. And we didn't know, but it was paralyzed. and because we were, it was our first and only pet, so we're not let anything happen to it. So what parents, the dad talked to us about, you can now we can have it put to sleep. It'd probably be the humane thing to do because I don't know if it's going to able to, he knew, but we didn't. We said, no, let's give it a chance to heal. We told him, let's get, and he said, okay. So the next day, no more than 2 days later, it starts gnawing kind of at its, and that's what I guess rodents do. And they have an appendage that doesn't work. They try to knock it off.
Yikes.
And it started that, and it was bloody. And I remember we were in school because coming home from school, and I don't know, probably I was in the backyard because I was sad about my guinea pig. So I'm out there just by this tree we had back there, and I was digging around in the dirt by myself, probably 9 years old. My dad comes out there, and he said, I got some bad news. And I said, what? And he goes, I had to take your guinea pig. I had to take John Fitzgerald to the vet and have him put to sleep. And although I was sad, we were very sad about it. I think we even then had the realization that the guinea pig was done. So I said, he goes, took it to the vet and had it put to sleep. Okay. So we didn't get mad at dad or anything. And it was fine. We were real sad and all that. But I would say at least 15 years later, maybe 20 years later, I'm talking to my uncle. And we had some other crazy stuff going with hamsters and guinea pig or two. And so we were just kind of talking like that. And I said, yeah. And I remember at the time my dad came out and told me it had to have the guinea pig put to sleep. My uncle goes, put to sleep? He goes, the vet was going to charge $5. He chopped his head off with a shovel and buried it right there on the spot. And I was go, I'm glad you didn't tell me that back then because that would have been even sadder, but that all makes sense. That all makes sense. He's a farm boy. $5 was a lot of money back then. I think, back then we had over six of us and he was making around $100 a week, $100 a week. So about $400 a month. And mom didn't, back then didn't work.
$5 was a line item on the budget.
We had one car, 1953 Ford station wagon. We had that car, and that was the last new car they bought for like 30 years. It was this 1953 Ford station wagon, and it was red, and everybody knew us. The Wakefield's in that red Ford station wagon because we for at least 10 years, and then we sold it, and my dad bought 59 Ford with a police cruiser, whatever. My dad, he just, he was an opportunist when it came to cars. He didn't know anything about
point A to point B.
Point A to point B. If it gets you there, it's done a good job. It was a great place to grow up on Q Street. We had the alleyways that went between the backs of the houses. We were on a party line we all shared the same phone line.
What were some of the I know the answer to this, but share some of the families that grew up in those neighborhoods in there.
We grew up in a great family neighborhood, Park Hill. Within 2 blocks of where we lived was our church. 4 blocks east was our school, Baldwin Elementary School. About a block to the west was a little neighborhood grocery store, and and then all the people we knew. And I guess one thing we didn't talk about at all was paper routes. My parents are always interested that we work. So when I was probably 8 or 9 and Steve was 10 or 11, we got a paper route. It was like 9 blocks. We'd ride our bicycles, and we would get up in the morning and fold the papers back before you rolled them. Rolling with a rubber band was a huge improvement because we actually folded them. I could still fold one to this day. And you folded them into a rectangle, probably like a 5x7, maybe a little bigger. And so you got pretty good at sailing those things from your bicycle. I can't believe now that my parents let their 8, 9-year-old son out at 5:30 in the morning on a bicycle with a basket full of newspapers. When we first started, it was 40 cents for a regular week, including Sundays, and 60 cents for they had a Monday morning and afternoon paper.
So last names of families in that neighborhood, yeah.
Families in that neighborhood. Well, we had, like I said, McConnell's lived across the street, and Fred and Hazel Montgomery lived next door. The Davenports. There was a Jewish couple, the Sholams, lived in this duplex across the street. There, some different people lived on the other side of the duplex. But one time, we didn't have the cable or anything. We only got like 1 or 2 TV stations, and we had an antenna. And sometimes we would pick up a Tulsa channel, but it was intermittent. You couldn't depend on it. And then later on, we actually got on the cable. I remember Steve and I watching Fantastic Theater that first Saturday we were on. It was one of those, supposed to be a scary movie that had hosts, would have a guy dressed up like a ghost or a vampire or something that would talk about it. And then later in college, in high school and college, they had Mazeppa Uncanny Film Festival with Mazeppa Papazoidi on there. And so we had, we would watch these stations, but I was going down that, but the other people, I knew tons of people right up the street from us. The Siglers owned Sigler Music Company. The Crows, Dr. Crow and his son Neil is my age. They had a house up there, and they later sold it to the Noltes. But now on the other side of Ballman, you went like 5 blocks here at Ballman. The other side was another host of people that lived between Ballman School and the Church League ballparks. And that was the Carbers, the Parkers, the Malones. I've just reread portions of Greg Carber's book, which there was a lot of stuff in there about things that I remember back from Ballman and some particular events. And Greg and I, back in grade school for a while there, we'd play tennis and we'd run around a little bit together, but the Carver boys were an interesting group just amongst themselves because there were 5 boys, and there were 3 of them that were the main ones that I knew, and that would be Greg and Phil and Stan. And Greg was my age, Phil a year older, Stan 2 years older, and Steve, my brother, knew Stan. But and I was talking to my good buddy Frank Staver the other day. Frank and I have been friends since we were 6 years old. We were talking about this one particular night we spent at the Carver's house. We were all on sleeping bags, laying in the backyard, looking up at the stars, and it was just raining shooting stars that night. It was just a really memorable night over there at the Carver boys. But one of the things in the book, and the name of the book was Giggsy, Bobby Joe Burns, and God, or something like that. Giggsy was Gary Parker, who my dad actually worked when, after he retired from Western Union, he worked for Parker Solvents, which was Carol Parker, Giggsy's dad. And Giggsy was down there. Giggsy was a really interesting guy. And in the long run, he had some really bad mental issues. And he wound up dying pretty young. I would say I don't think he made it to 40. I think he probably made it in his 30s. But anyway, that neighborhood. They also had Arthur Blake, lived down there. And Arthur was this, they said he wasn't Down syndrome. He'd had a brain injury when he was little. And he always would come down to Church League ballparks. And was he going down there when you were?
Yeah, he must have done that for decades because he was still around the ballparks.
Oh, he did it for decades. He was a little older than I, and he always he'd wear a sheriff badge, cowboy hat. He might look if he was still alive. He might come down and give him a Stetson.
Yep.
Later on, and this was after we were going there, he would come to the concession stand and tell them to call an ambulance. Somebody gotten hurt. And I think the first couple of times they fell for it.
That's a that's a name that you go through life and you forget, but I think there's a whole lot of people who remember Arthur from the church
Arthur,
league
yeah,
ballparks. But I
yeah,
that's a vivid memory now that I recall it of him being around the church league
yeah.
ballparks. And
He was part of the culture, back then. Every summer you knew if nothing else was the same, Arthur was going to be there. And
unbelievable that
go I see. He had very distinctive things that he said. Going back to the people who lived across the street, it was a little step up of the neighborhood from where I was growing up, but not much. But that was one of the things in Greg's book was talking about, and I remember this real well too, because I lived going the other direction. I lived west of school, and this was just across east. And right across the school was a gas station, and behind them was the neighborhood. And Scocuses lived over there. Ted Scocus and Doug, who's a year younger than me, and Kemp a year older, and they had 3 or 4 other kids. Doug, good friend, good guy, but there was Coach Malone, which that's a whole different set of stories.
that was
And
his granddaughter was my high school
yeah,
girlfriend. Yeah.
yeah, and Amy was your high school girlfriend, and that was Randy, who was my age, and and Coach Malone, maybe 120 pounds. He was a little guy. He was the head football coach at Ramsey, and the things he did back then, I actually tried to do what he said to do, because then you stayed out of trouble, especially playing football. Because if you did piss him off, there's no telling what he would do to you. I mean, he would knock you off, but never did it to me. But I saw it happen many times where he would be a football player, he'd knock them off the bench onto the ground, pick them back up by their face mask, set them back on the bench, knock them right back down. Do that over and over again. He just did things that you couldn't.
No way.
Nobody. But that's a whole different set of stories to be Coach Lone's stories. You saw it back then as that was just part of the norm, that he was able. I mean, he had a little coach's office there in the corner of the locker room, and he and the shop teacher and the assistant coaches would go in there and just try to figure out what can we do to this paddle to make it more effective, where we can actually show some blisters, or just. And so, if you had a little bit of sense, you figured out do what he says, and don't piss him off. But there are some people that message never got through to them, and they were taking all the heat from everybody. But anyway, Coach Malone was like a Golden Gloves boxer, and he smoked unfiltered Camels and Lucky Strikes right there in the locker room, when they were talking to you, and there was no restrictions. He smoked during practice. He'd smoke in the huddle. But anyway, Randy was his age, and Greg, and I guess they grew up in the same neighborhood. So they figure out, and I think Gary Parker was the one that instigated it all, that these two guys need to have a fight. See who was king of the neighborhood. I was in the second grade, maybe third. I had to go back. I don't know if Greg's book said exactly when, but they all agreed to it. And we all thinking Greg is going to kick his butt. It's not even going to be close. I mean, it's not even a fair fight. They were about the same size. They were both pretty small. But we just knew Greg was a whole lot tougher than Randy. And I'd have given anything to be able to go to that fight. But I had to go the other direction. I didn't want to get in trouble. I was too worried about getting in trouble my whole life. So I didn't go. In fact, I don't know if I knew back then we knew what the result was. And Greg beat his ass. But Gary, during the course of it, he was first a promoter. Then he became Greg's manager in this fight. And so Coach Malone was pissed at Gary for instigating some things in Greg's book, which I really enjoy reading Greg's book. I didn't agree with everything he said. My memory's not exactly the same as everything he said, but there's a lot. It was.
Well, and for those who might not know, to carry on the lineage of this all is I have traveled the world with the Carvers, and Wes is one of my absolute best friends in this whole world. So it really kind of a full circle bit of stories here.
The
And
Carvers were, and Phil, he's incredibly interesting guy, and I've read his book, at least one, maybe two of his books, and he's a good writer too. I read the one about what he was doing during that same time Greg was writing part of his story. When he was in Vietnam,
well,
and that
he is slated to be one of the next guests on the Moon Ridge podcast here.
He'd be a lot more interesting than I would ever be, because
this has been
he and
great.
Randy
Cutting's another one that would be great.
Phil's he's done a lot of things that I can't imagine. I know he and Kemp Skokas did some crazy travels, kind of like you and Wes did some crazy travels back in their day.
He's got a new book out, and I'm going to get him on to join us and tell us about it. But, Dad, this has just been a great session, and I've really enjoyed getting to walk through some of these stories with you. And Moon Ridge is about heritage, and you are at the top of the food chain for me.
I've been amazed at how entrepreneurial you've done, things that I would never have been able to do, never would have had the guts to do, and I enjoy watching your success and your thought process in doing these things. It's been amazing to me, what you've done and how successful you've been. To go from selling freight services to being a senior vice president of a public oil and gas company in a pretty short period of time. I mean, that was amazing.
Well, I think it can circle back into something you said in your stories here, and it comes from my grandfather and down through you. I don't know how many times he told me this in his 80s and his 90s, that Wakefields have never been scared to work and put in the extra time. And he always said, Zach, we never have to worry about you having a job, because when somebody hires you, you're going to work. And he goes, that our family's been very lucky, but our family's also put in the hours. And I grew up watching you put in the hours, Dad.
In all honesty, do regret some of the hours that I put in that I wished I had spent at home. And I've told young people this: don't put off all your time with your family until you retire. Don't wait. Carve that time out now. Carve that time out when they're young, and you can make some memories rather than just blindly going to work. I've had a great support system and a great family.
It's just been an amazing interview, and I thank you for your time, and this has just been precious to me. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Zach. Appreciate it. Love you, man.